Good morning, afternoon, evening. This is chapter 16. Well, first, it's Anatomy and Physiology 2. This is Dr. Copeland, and this particular chapter that we're covering is chapter 16. It is on the endocrine system. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is why it matters. Like, why should we care about the endocrine system? So, understanding about the endocrine system is going to enable us to do things like monitor and advise patients with diseases such as diabetes mellitus. Now, a little bit of an overview of the endocrine system. It does act with the nervous system to coordinate and integrate activity of body cells. It influences metabolic activities via hormones, which are transported in blood. And hormones, in case you're wondering, we are going to go over it in a couple slides, but they're like chemical messengers secreted by one cell that gets transported in the blood and has an effect on other cells. Responses are slower. So compared to the nervous system, it is going to be slower, but compared to the nervous system, it's going to last longer. And then the study of hormones and endocrine organs is called endocrinology. So if we were to compare the nervous system and the endocrine system, the first thing we would see is that the nervous system initiates responses rapidly. It's that electrical system. If you remember, like it sends those electrical impulses, it goes down the axon and boom, it's fast. The endocrine system, however, has to first make the hormone, then release the hormone, then the hormone has to circulate throughout the blood, then it has to do something with the target cell, and so it takes a little bit longer. The nervous system, short duration responses, right? It's rapid and it's short. The endocrine system, long duration responses. Now, how long is going to depend upon the hormone itself, okay? We're going to talk about the concept of half-life a little bit later. Some hormones have long half-life, some hormones have really short half-life. The nervous system acts via action potentials and neurotransmitters. If you guys remember, that's how that nerve signal is sent, is via an action potential. And then when it goes from one axon to another dendrite or cell body, it's going to go via a neurotransmitter or an effector, depending upon what we're talking about. The endocrine system is going to act via hormones that are released into the blood. That's it. As simple as that. It's a hormone. Nervous system acts at specific locations determined by axon pathways. So those axons, they're going to very distinct places. And wherever that axon goes is where the signal is going to be sent. The endocrine system acts at diffuse locations, and targets can be anywhere the blood reaches. Endocrine system controls and integrates a number of things, including reproduction, growth and development, maintenance of electrolyte, water, and nutrient balance of blood, regulation of cellular metabolism and energy balance, mobilization of body defenses. So if you sit here and you look at this list, you can actually start picturing all the different systems that the endocrine system controls and integrates, right? The reproductive system. Fluid, electrolyte, water balance, urinary system. Metabolism, digestive system. So, it's going to play a role with a number of different systems. We have exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands are the ones that have ducts that carry their secretions to the membrane surface. And they're going to produce a non-hormonal substance like sweat, saliva. Endocrine glands are the ones that produce hormones and lack ducts. More of an endocrine system overview. Well, this whole thing is an endocrine system overview, but the endocrine glands include pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, and pineal glands. The hypothalamus is a neuroendocrine organ, so it has both like nervous system type function as well as an endocrine system function. Okay. Some organs have exocrine and endocrine functions, like the pancreas, gonads, placenta. Other tissues and organs that produce hormones include adipose cells, which are fat cells, thymus, which sits a little bit above the heart, the cells in the walls of small intestine, stomach, kidneys, and heart. And then this is a picture, a diagram showing the different organs. So up here we have the hypothalamus connected to the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, adrenal glands sitting on top of the kidney, pancreas in the middle here, and then down on the pelvic cavity we have the gonads. So chemical messengers of the endocrine system include, we have to be careful here. We have to be real careful because really the chemical messengers of the endocrine system include hormones, and that's it. Hormones are long-distance chemical signals that travel in blood or lymph. But we also have autocrines and paracrines. And autocrines and paracrines are both local chemical messengers that are not considered part of the endocrine system, but we still talk about them here because they are chemicals that are secreted by one cell that do have an effect on either itself, which we're about to talk about, or other cells in that general area. So autocrines are going to be chemicals that exert effects on the same cells that secrete them. So basically, cell X secretes a chemical, and that chemical comes back and has an effect on cell X. Paracrines are locally acting chemicals that affect cells other than those that secrete them. There are two main classes of hormones: amino acid-based hormones. So this is our amino acid derivatives, peptides, proteins, and steroids. And steroids are going to be synthesized from cholesterol. You know what? Let me back up because I want to make sure I didn't just make that confusing. So there's two main classes of hormones: amino acid-based hormones and steroids. Okay, the amino acid-based hormones include amino acid derivatives, peptides, and proteins. And then steroids, which are a different class of hormone, are synthesized from cholesterol. This includes gonadal and adrenocortical hormones. Now, the reason we talk about this, and it's actually kind of interesting, is that this is going to play a role in a couple of things. Pretty much all amino acids act one way and all steroids act another way, okay? And it's going to determine how it travels in the blood, and once it gets to a cell, what it's going to do to the cell. Okay, is it going to bind to the membrane of the cell, or is it going to cross through the plasma membrane, get inside, and do something inside of the cell? Now, as always with biology, there are exceptions to these rules, and I'm going to go over these exceptions in a minute. But there is a third possible class called eicosanoids. It's considered a hormone by some scientists, but mostly it's classified as just a paracrine. So, though hormones circulate systemically, only cells with receptors for that hormone are affected, and cells with receptors for a particular hormone are called target cells. Okay, because they are the target of that hormone. So, if you had, let's say your body was made of 1 million cells, okay? And which it's not. It's made of much more than that, but let's just say it's made of 1 million cells. And let's say that we have two different hormones. We may have a hormone like thyroid hormone, and let's say we have thyroid hormone, and it can affect maybe 900,000. So the 100,000 that are not affected or that don't have the receptor for thyroid hormone are not going to thyroid hormone is not going to do anything to those cells. It's only going to do something to the 900,000 cells that actually have receptors for thyroid hormone. And hormones are going to alter target cell activity. That's what they do. Hormone action on target cells may be to, a number of things. Alter plasma membrane permeability and or membrane potential by opening or closing ion channels. So may open sodium channels. Stimulate synthesis of enzymes or other proteins. Activate or deactivate enzymes. Induce secretory activity. Or stimulate mitosis. And then hormones act in one of two ways depending upon their chemical nature and receptor location. And so this is what I was talking about earlier with the amino acid based hormones versus thyroid hormones. So we have two different classes here. We have water-soluble hormones and we have lipid-soluble hormones. Water-soluble hormones include all the amino acid-based hormones except thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is going to be considered a lipid-soluble hormone along with all the steroid hormones. So, going back to water-soluble hormones. Water-soluble hormones are going to act on plasma membrane receptors, and they act via G protein second messengers. They cannot enter the cell. And here's the thing. We've gone over, well, not we, I don't know what you've done, but in the past, some second messenger stuff has come up in AMP1, and I personally did not spend a lot of time covering that, so I don't know what your background is with second messengers, but just be aware that's really all you need to know. I'm going to show you a diagram here in a second, but don't worry, you do not have to remember the diagram or anything. Okay, so that was the water-soluble hormones. They're G protein second messengers, cannot enter the cell. Then we have our lipid-soluble hormones. So because they're lipid soluble, they can get through that phospholipid bilayer that surrounds the cell, and they will act on intracellular receptors that directly activate genes. They can enter the cell because they are lipid soluble. So this is what I was talking about. This is the way that water-soluble hormones, the mechanism of water-soluble hormones, basically. So this is not going to be on the exam, but I just want you to kind of see the little pathway that occurs. So the hormone is going to bind to the receptor, okay? The receptor is going to activate the G protein down here. Okay, so you see what comes off as a GDP, comes in as a GTP. This is activated. The G protein then is going to activate adenylate cyclase, which is what this is right here. And then adenylate cyclase is going to convert ATP, losing my cursor here, ATP to cyclic AMP, which is a second messenger. Cyclic AMP is then going to activate protein kinase, or kinases, excuse me. This would be an inactive protein kinase, and then it's going to activate that protein kinase. And then that is going to trigger a response of the target cell. It may be to activate enzymes, stimulate cellular secretion, open an ion channel, etc. Intracellular receptors and direct gene activation, this is what's done with steroid hormones. So lipid-soluble steroid hormone and thyroid hormone, let's not forget thyroid hormone that falls in that same category, can actually cross that plasma membrane and get into the target cell and bind with intracellular receptors. Once it binds with the intracellular receptor, the receptor hormone complex will then enter the nucleus and bind to a specific region of DNA. Once it binds to that region of DNA, it's going to help initiate transcription of a specific segment to produce a specific segment of mRNA. That mRNA is then going to leave the nucleus, go into the cytosol, and be translated into a specific protein. Proteins synthesized have various functions. Examples include metabolic activity, structural purposes, or it may be exported from the cell. But that's what this diagram is showing. So the first thing we have is we have the steroid hormone outside the cell. It has to cross, get into the cell. It'll bind to the receptor inside of the cell, which is an intracellular receptor. This will cross into the nucleus and bind to a specific region of the DNA. It will initiate transcription. We will end up with this little segment of mRNA, and then this segment of mRNA will leave, go to the cytosol, and then be translated into a new protein. Hormone release. So blood levels of hormones are controlled by negative feedback systems. Hopefully you guys remember homeostasis back from ANP1. That was like one of the very first things that I teach in ANP1 is homeostasis and negative and positive feedback systems. But negative feedback, just as a reminder, is like, well, my air conditioning system is broken, but if it was working right now, the way that the air conditioner would work, right? So let's say the house is set on 77, which is typical in my house. And I know for some of you guys may say that that's a little hot, but in my house, 77 is normal. So let's say it's set on 77, and let's say it's 103 outside. That's what it's supposed to be on like Saturday, 103. So it's set on 77, it's 103 outside. So what happens is naturally the inside of the house is going to get warmer, right? So it gets up to 78 and the air conditioner kicks on. Okay, blows cold air, brings the temperature back down to probably 76. Once it gets to 76, it kicks off, right? And then outside makes it hot again, goes back up to 78, and then air kicks back on, and then it just keeps happening over and over again. And I hope I said the right temperatures. So air would kick on at like 78, and then it would kick off at 76. But increased hormone effects on target cells can inhibit further hormone release. That's basically what negative feedback systems do. Whatever the target organ, whatever the effect is on the target organ, it will inhibit further hormone release. Levels vary only within a narrow desirable range, and hormone release is triggered by endocrine gland stimuli or nervous system modulation. So the endocrine glands are stimulated to synthesize and release hormones in response to one of three stimuli. So make sure you don't get these confused. It's humoral, neural, and hormonal. Okay, do not confuse humoral and hormonal. They sound very close together, or very similar. But humoral stimuli is whenever there's changing levels of ions and nutrients that directly stimulate the secretion of hormones. An example of this would be calcium levels in the blood. So as calcium levels in the blood decline, this stimulates the parathyroid gland to secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone, as you may or may not remember, causes osteoclast to break down bone, and it's going to release calcium, which is going to cause calcium concentrations to rise in the blood, and then the stimulus is removed. So that's humoral stimuli. This is with ions and nutrients, direct stimulation. And so that's what this is showing, this diagram. It's showing the parathyroid, which is located on the kind of the back side of the thyroid gland. And this would release parathyroid hormone in response to low calcium levels in the blood. And once, excuse me, the osteoclasts break down the bone, the calcium levels go up, and then that stimulus is gone. We have neural stimuli. This is where nerve fibers stimulate hormone release. An example of this is sympathetic nervous system fibers stimulating the adrenal medulla to secrete catecholamines. And that's, again, what this is showing. We have just a direct line going from spinal cord straight down to the endocrine organ here, and then it's going to cause the release of catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And then finally we have hormonal stimuli. And this is where hormones stimulate other endocrine organs to release their hormones. We're going to see this a lot. Hypothalamic hormones stimulate release of most anterior pituitary hormones, which is great, right? But then in turn, the anterior pituitary hormones stimulate targets to secrete even more hormones. We have the hypothalamic pituitary target endocrine organ feedback loop, and this is where hormones from the final target organ will inhibit the release of anterior pituitary hormones. So hypothalamus stimulates anterior pituitary to release, let's say, thyroid stimulating hormone, which will stimulate the thyroid gland, and then thyroid hormone will be released, and then it'll inhibit more of this being released. Same thing with the adrenal cortex and with the gonads. And we'll go over each one of these in later lectures. I don't want to get too in depth right now because this is really kind of still like an overview type. This is kind of a little like, this is not even an overview, this is given an example. And then we have nervous system modulation. The nervous system can make adjustments to hormone levels when needed. It can modify stimulation or inhibition of endocrine glands. And the nervous system can actually straight up override normal endocrine controls. So as an example, in order to prepare the body for fight or flight under severe stress, the hypothalamus and sympathetic nervous system can override insulin to allow blood glucose levels to increase. And then we have target cell specificity. So I've already talked about the fact that in order for a cell to be affected by a hormone, it has to have a receptor for that hormone. And that's exactly what the first line here says. So an example is ACTH receptors are found only on certain cells of the adrenal cortex, but thyroxine receptors are found on nearly all cells of the body. So target cell activation is going to depend upon three factors. The first one is blood levels of the hormone. The second is the relative number of receptors in or on the target cell. And the third is going to be the affinity of binding or the strength of binding between the receptor and the hormone. Now, the amount of hormone can actually influence the number of receptors that a cell has for that hormone. And we have upregulation and downregulation. And upregulation is when a target cell actually makes more receptors in response to low hormone levels. Downregulation is the opposite. The hormone will actually lose receptors in response to high hormone levels, and this just desensitizes the target cell to prevent it from overreacting if there are persistently high levels of hormone. And then the final things we talk about in this particular talk are half-life, onset, and duration of hormone activity. So hormones circulate in the blood either free or bound. And so if you go back to remembering the water-soluble and lipid-soluble, the steroid and thyroid hormones, which are lipid-soluble, are going to travel in the blood attached to plasma proteins. The other ones, which are all water-soluble, the amino acid derivatives, are going to circulate without carriers. Concentrations of circulating hormones reflect, first the rate of release, and then the speed at which it is inactivated or removed from the body. And when we talk about being removed from the body, hormones can be removed from the blood by a number of ways. One is a degrading enzyme. 2 is kidney. 3 is liver. And half-life is the time required for the level of hormone in the blood to decrease by half. This varies anywhere from a fraction of a minute to a week, depending upon the hormone. I'm going to give you an example. Adrenaline, epinephrine, same thing, right? It used to be called, one, and now it's called the other. It doesn't matter. It both means the same thing. But epinephrine, it breaks down. It has a half-life of, I looked it up online and I saw one source that said 2 to 3 minutes. I saw another source that said 1 minute. So let's just say 2 minutes just to be safe, okay? Very, very short half-life. I mean, some of them are even shorter than that. They're a fraction of a minute. But still, if you consider even 2 minutes versus, let's say, going back to comparing it to the nervous system, I mean, the nervous system is like milliseconds, right? That's the amount of duration. And here we're talking minutes up to a week. Now, then if we look at a hormone like, there's actually a version of testosterone or it's a pharmaceutical grade testosterone that's given that actually has a half-life of 8 days. So, it just depends upon the hormone. So, hormones have different response times. Some responses are immediate. Some, especially steroid, can take hours to days. So if you go to the doctor and you get a steroid shot, particularly like if you get steroid injections like in your back or something like I've had that done like more times than I can even count. They'll tell you like, it can take up to 3 to 5 days for you to feel the full effect of this injection. And that's why, because steroids just take longer to respond. Some are inactive until they enter target cells. The duration of response is usually limited. It ranges from 10 seconds to several hours, and the effects may disappear rapidly as blood levels drop. But some may persist for hours at low blood levels. Half-life, onset, and duration of hormone activity are dependent upon whether the hormone is water or lipid soluble. This is just kind of showing a table. Let's see, we have lipid-soluble hormones on one side, water-soluble on the other, and then it just kind of breaks it down. So it tells us like the lipid-soluble are all steroid plus thyroid hormones, which we know, and water-soluble are all amino acid based hormones except thyroid hormone. I think I called it amino acid derivatives earlier. I meant amino acid based, but still, same thing. I mean, not the same thing, but hopefully you understood what I meant. Sources. So the sources for lipid-soluble hormone: adrenal cortex, gonads, thyroid hormone, and then water-soluble, all other endocrine glands. Stored in secretory vesicles. Lipid-soluble, no. Water-soluble, yes. Yeah, I mean, you do need to know the information in this table because we've already gone over it. The half-life of lipid-soluble hormones are long, water-soluble are short. Lipid-soluble hormones are transported in the blood bound to plasma proteins. Water-soluble are usually free in the plasma. Lipid-soluble hormones, location of receptors is inside of the cell, usually. Water-soluble on the plasma membrane. And then mechanism of action on target cell with lipid-soluble hormones activate genes, cause synthesis of new proteins, and water-soluble hormones are going to act through second messenger systems. Then we have interactions of hormones at target cells. Multiple hormones may act on the same target at the same time. Excuse me. We have permissiveness. This is where one hormone cannot exert its effects without another hormone being present. As an example, reproductive hormones need thyroid hormone to have effect. We have synergism. This is where one hormone produces same effects on target cells, causing more than one hormone produces the same effects on target cells, which is going to cause amplification. And that's what the big deal is here. Is with synergism is amplification. Example is going to be glucagon and epinephrine both cause liver to release glucose. And then we have antagonism. And this is when one or more hormones oppose the action of another hormone. Insulin and glucagon. Insulin causes cells to actually take up glucose, lowering blood glucose levels. Glucagon, as I said earlier, causes the liver to release glucose, which is going to increase blood glucose levels. So those do two, they're opposing. These are the first questions for you guys to answer for extra credit. I'm just going to create one Chapter 16 extra credit assignment, and these will all be on there. You'll just type up everything into Blackboard and submit it, and you'll be good to go. I should have numbered them. They'll be numbered here on out, but so we can assume that how does a hormone differ from a paracrine would be number 1. Number 2 is going to be give an example of a hormone with a long half-life and a hormone with a short half-life. And please do not give the examples that were given in lecture today. And then number 3, the release of thyroid hormone is caused by blank stimuli. And we went over a number of different types of stimuli that cause hormone release. So what causes thyroid hormone to be released? That is all I have for you for this lecture.